That.
All right, Doug, we're back. It's been about, I guess, over a week since our last recording, and a big part of that was because we were both in Mexico. You were speaking at a conference, and why don't you just share your observations, I guess, of Mexico, of the people at the conference, and kind of what you learned while being there.
Hmm. Okay. Well, flying down to Mexico, courtesy of United Airlines, I, you know, it used to be such an adventure to fly, but that was many, many years ago. I hate flying today. I've said that before. I'll say it again. And it's more true today than ever before. I mean, it's not just the going through the nonsense charade drill with TSA, but now, of course, your papers have to be in order. And I forget, did we have to get COVID tests to get on a plane
Nope.
in,
We just
no,
need we just need them on the way back.
just to get out of Mexico to get back into the empire. That's what
Mhm.
it was.
Right. Right. But there were lots of, I mean, there was a lot more that you have to do in terms of having your papers in order, confirmations you have to do. And we can talk about some of that. I'm more interested in really, and honestly, what, the crowd that you were speaking with in Mexico was very interesting because these were people who are, international people looking to internationalize themselves. And it was surprising watching your speech with them because it was like a lot of new information seemed to be hitting them, for the first time. And it was, obviously you saw this from stage too, and you talked to people out there. So what do you think the attendees, what did you make of the attendees?
Well, it was interesting. The group, I don't know if it's appropriate to mention their name or not. What do you
Sure, why
think?
not? Yeah, 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 no
Okay,
problem.
it was a group that I'd kind of vaguely heard about, but actually didn't know anything at all about. But so they invited me to go down there, made it worth my while to do that. And it was very interesting because it was a very upmarket group. The cost of attending the seminar was $4,000, except for 10 people who were VIPs who paid $10,000 for 3 days of listening to lectures on what it's like to live abroad and how you form foreign corporations and foreign trusts and various tax aspects of different countries, and other aspects of different countries. 200 countries in the world, so you can't get much in that time. So, a very upmarket group, quite frankly, financially. And interestingly, also, is that at the Grand Hyatt, which was apparently the biggest facility in Playa del Carmen, which is one of the three towns near Cancun, um, they sold out. At those prices, sold out. And there were only 310 or something like that seats in the auditorium, and they were full. So I thought this was absolutely fascinating.
Mhm.
The demand out there uh, on the part of Americans, and the general lack of sophistication on the part of even very upmarket, uh, well-to-do Americans. So I don't know what to make of that or whatever, but here's another. Well, I'll just toss out another thought. It's that in my speech, which was rather radical and rabble rousing, telling them that you know run around, scream and shout, the sky's about to fall. I mean, I really have to say, I told them that pretend you're Henny Penny from an economic point of view. I don't think most of the people in the audience were very worried about the economy. I mean, everything seemed pretty good to them.
Mhm.
Just seemed that way to me. I mean, stock market's up, inflation's still relatively low. and everybody's doing good. There's no chaos, and well, not so much chaos in the streets now since Biden's been elected. So, they didn't want to hear about the Greater Depression so much, although I was told that my speech was the most popular of those given. For
Well,
what it's worth. I mean, I'm not, it's not like I live on adulation, but it's always nice to hear that people liked you. Although usually people hate me because of what I say. But anyway,
I think
just
a little bit of both. I think your speeches. The funny thing about them is that you simultaneously woo the crowd and insult them, and and so like people, you'll say something, insult them like directly, but insult their ideas because they're just not prepared to hear some of it. But they're drawn in. You say certain things, they go, "Yeah, I agree with that. That makes a lot of sense. I agree with that." And then you say something that causes such a great cognitive dissonance in their head because they totally disagree with it, hadn't considered it, and it's really entertaining to watch the audience when you're speaking. Actually, especially one like that was surprisingly. There were some people obviously who definitely knew your kind of, your point of view on it. Seemed like there were some people there that were just totally new, totally new to really thinking about a lot of these ideas. So it was entertaining to watch for sure. And when you were trying to wrap up, like, no, not yet. They wanted you to. It was almost like they asked for an encore of sorts to keep you going a little longer with some Q&A. So it was good.
yeah, it was fun. And it was good to get out of the house, get down to Mexico and see some new stuff. Anyway, uh, I think that my speaking technique has probably been over influenced by George Carlin, quite frankly. Uh, George was good because he usually treated the audience with the respect that they deserved. And
Right.
what that means, you can draw your own conclusions.
Right. Well, and there was some interest, some things about there is about and one of the things there was a you'd think that this group would be some of the more prepared people in the world because clearly they have assets. They're at this conference looking to, you know, for plan B essentially, to set themselves up for lower taxation or higher quality of life or whatever else. And yet, you know, I just I felt like I was shocked by how unprepared the prepared are for the economic problems at all. And you alluded to this already, but I think that part of it is just there's a lot of them are crypto people, and crypto is way up, and they just can't imagine going any other way. Honestly, I feel like that's constant conversations we have with people. It's a problem when you actually start having a cell phone, Doug.
Well, I'm back in the US, and if you don't have a cell phone, you really can't communicate very well. So, yeah, I'm ashamed of it, but here it is.
So anyway, so you have so your crypto's way up. A lot of people's businesses are doing all this income that people have, and so yeah, you're right. It does seem like that they can't imagine that something bad could happen. That there could be some sort of economic problem, and I don't know. I just don't even know how that blind spot can exist in people's head when people say they watch this show, for instance, and say call it a doomcast or whatever. We're always talking about how bad things are, and yet it seems like there's a whole hell of a lot of people that are pretty sophisticated, I guess, who have no idea what's coming.
No, and of course, I read the Wall Street Journal, and I don't get really any kind of an inkling of any kind of major problems. Uh, I read Barron's, which is not nearly, not even remotely, the quality that it was years ago when I started reading it. And there's no inkling of any storm clouds on the horizon there. And I presume it's that way with most of the conventional American press these days. So I think people are going to be taken by surprise. I really do.
Yeah, when
And especially with the stock market at all-time highs, and it appears that most of the gurus out there think it's going a lot higher. Maybe it will. I mean, money makes the mirror run, and they're certainly going to be printing up lots more money. And the bond market at all-time highs, more or less. And the real estate market absolutely booming. Lots of ads being run to, your house is doing really well. You're making a fortune on your house. Borrow $50,000 or $100,000 on it now. So, God, everything certainly looks good. I mean, I've got to admit it. On the other hand, uh, commodities have more or less doubled in the last year. Corn, wheat, soybeans, copper. I mean, trying to think of a bunch of others. Well, the others are going to run, and that's going to be reflected in much higher prices. The fact is, we were talking about, I don't know if we talked about this the last time, that seems to be a really big thing. What could break this bubble? Um, I'm thinking maybe the first thing is going to be not necessarily a meltdown in the markets, but perhaps the end of forbearance on rents and mortgages. What happens then? I mean, what's the scenario? Possible scenario of several million renters having to start paying rent again, and at least a couple of million mortgagees that are way behind on their payments to the bank. What's going to happen then? How's that going to play out?
I mean, well, they've gotten so used to not having paying so long. It's almost like they'll the psychology of somebody who has basically been able to avoid paying something like that for so long. As soon as they are required to once again, it'll feel punitive. You know, and
Yes.
it'll feel like why am I being punished?
Well, they're going to be double punished because not only are they going to have to start paying, but they're going to be presented with a bill for the unpaid last 12 or 14 months.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
where are they going to come up with that money? I guess it's, I mean, one possibility is so that all these people aren't kicked out into the street and have to start living under bridges or on the sidewalk. Perhaps the government will take over the obligations for them on some basis.
That's like the only way out of it, because otherwise you're going to have, I mean, you just think it would lead to directly to some sort of civil unrest of some kind. You know, if you're forcing these people or, you know, or going to kick them out of their house, that it's just going to blow up. I mean, it's just going to, that's the problem. So you imagine the path of least resistance is the government stepping in some way, you know, stepping in and just easing the burden, you know, maybe more temporary measures, you know, that emergency measures just to keep in their homes. Ultimately, that potentially puts it so that the federal government could become the largest owner of real estate, you know, of residential real estate in the country if they're stepping that away from the current mortgage holders, essentially.
Yes, yes, that's quite correct. And of course, the other thing is at some point, I don't know when, I expect before the end of the year, but who knows? I mean, don't ask me. I'm a perma bear. I mean, but when the stock market melts down and when the bond market melts down, then there are going to be a lot of pension funds that are going to be troubled and may have to cut back. And this is going to happen at the same time as retail prices start running away. And once again, I'd mention the possibility of what Mises described as a crack up boom here. It's where lots and lots of money is being pushed into society, and people go out and spend that money. So they buy everything, and businesses are selling everything off the shelves. But at the same time, they don't really have the stuff to replace it because you can't get people to work because they're still getting all that stimmy money that the government can't take away from them. So it's going to amount to a snake eating its tail or living out of capital, I think, which is what happens when you consume stuff and live high off the hog, but you don't produce any stuff. So once again, I mean, I'm in a quandary. Here we are in the Indian summer. Here we are on the bottom of the ninth before we go back into the catastrophic hurricane again. But everything looks good just at this very moment to the casual observer.
Well, not just to the casual observer, it seems, because it seems that to even sophisticated people, they seem like they're good. Of course, the COVID stuff and the travel restrictions and the hassles, people don't like any of that. But it seems to me that the real game, like the real thing to worry about, is economic. That's coming, and we were talking about. There were two things that at the different meals that we had, I thought that were interesting, and one is that it's we talked about like the Poles, the Polish, right before Nazis invaded, they're along the border. They were, for some reason, they talked themselves out of thinking that that was a risk, that they were going to be invaded. And I don't know how that happened with their psychology, but that's correct, right? I mean, there was
Yeah.
just lined up there ready to go.
You think they would have asked themselves, what are a couple of million German troops doing right on our border? That's kind of strange, isn't it? And oddly enough, a couple of years later, that was in September of 1939, and in June of 1941, exactly the same thing happened with the Russians. They must have had plenty of spies wandering around in the part of Poland they owned. And there's a couple million German troops lined up right on the border. Gee, that's kind of funny. And it's the same thing now.
Yeah.
If you look at the economic indicators, you can see there are a lot of danger signs out there, but nobody's concerned. Not even the hedge fund managers that write articles in major media or anything.
Yeah. It's very interesting. The other thing, when we were having dinner one evening with Robert Kiyosaki, I asked, and he agrees with your assessment about this, the financial crisis, economic crisis. It's coming. It's just a matter of it's tomorrow or whenever. And I asked you specifically. I said, when do you think it'll come? Like, when do you? And like you said, you're a perma bear. Okay, that's fine. But you said you gave a very specific answer that I hadn't heard from you before. Do you want to share with people what that answer was?
Refresh my memory.
Well, I said,
was I one or two drunks? Well, was I one or two drinks into the conversation when I made this comment?
But and was why you're so specific. You said, I asked you, when do you think that there's a reckoning that's coming, but when is it coming? And you said, well, any time between tomorrow morning and this day next year.
Yeah, and I'm willing to make a bet on that. And Robert wouldn't take that bet because he agrees with me. And I know you wouldn't take the bet either. So unfortunately, there was no sucker at the table that I could have placed that bet with.
But I think we're all suckers if we ignore it, though. If we aren't actually doing things defensively to prepare for it, because it just, even the financial crisis, I think this is what's coming is likely to make that look like a rounding error, something very insignificant. That caused distortions and problems that, everywhere, in places that you couldn't imagine in advance. I think that's one of the things that worries me most about what's coming is that you can't even imagine the second and third order effects that will be caused when things start to unwind. What are your thoughts on that? Is there any area where you feel like there's some sense of safety, at least financially to have assets?
The only safe havens that I can see, sure, you can own treasury bills, and perhaps the guaranteed loss of 5% of capital at the moment per year. I think by the end of the year, it's going to be about 10% of capital per year. But at least losing 5 or 10% of capital is better than taking a chance getting caught in a meltdown of a market and losing 30 or 40 or 50%. So I guess you can still own treasury bills if you don't mind losing 5% or 10% as an insurance premium. So, okay, treasury bills, not bonds, not notes, bills. Number one. Number two, I think we're going back into a gold bull market at this point. I don't know how high it'll go, but I keep buying physical gold, generally, incidentally, 1/4 ounce gold coins, not 1 ounce gold coins. Why? It's because when you cross a border with a 1 ounce gold coin, this is a little known fact, but I'm speaking from personal experience. It's that when you cross a border with a 1 ounce gold coin, that's one thing. 10 of them twice in very disparate parts of the world. Once going from Chile to Argentina, once going from, where the hell was I? It was in Africa, it was in Mauritania. Talk about the weird countries where nobody goes to. In both cases, I had about a dozen silver 1-ounce things, commemoratives. God knows that I just picked them up and leave them in my briefcase. And both times, and Mexico was the third one. And when they saw that they were silver, not much value, they didn't care, but they were looking for gold and asked me if I had any gold. So they're on the lookout for 1-ounce gold coins. On the other hand, if you have 1/4-ounce gold coins, I guess they look like, small change, just junk coins you've got tossed around your briefcase. So I buy them now instead. So buy gold coins, buy silver coins. And I think most important, speculate, buy gold stocks right now, buy mining stocks of different metals, not just gold, because they're really, really very cheap. They're selling for, many of them are selling for 8, 9, 10, 12 times earnings at most. And many of them are paying decent dividends. Many of them are paying 2 or 3 or 4% in current dividends, and they are coining money. Because I'll repeat this again. I've said it before, but the average in the gold mining industry right now of producers, current producers, they're all in sustaining costs, which count everything, soup to nuts, administrative, postage stamps, replacement of the assets, interest, you name it, not just the cost in the mine of mining the next marginal ounce, which is the way they used to compute costs. But the average all-in sustaining cost for the producers in the industry is just under $1,000 an ounce today, okay? And gold itself is selling for over 1,800. So these companies are coining money, but nobody cares. So it's the only part of the market, broad category, that's really cheap. Also, I'll mention oil stocks. Hate to go on like this, Matt, but you asked a question. And I think it's important to get this out. It's that the other thing, other than mining, and it's not just gold, it's other types of mining too, but I like gold most actually, is oil, because the big statistic, I think, the big flag here is back in 1980, when everybody was oil crazy and we're running out of oil, and oil prices had exploded from, very cheap levels in the early 70s. At that time, oil stocks, oil-related stocks, including not just producers, but drillers and things like that, constituted over 30% of the S&P 500. Today, as we speak, they constitute under 3% of the S&P 500. So nobody likes oil. Even the big oil producers like BP and Shell have said, we're getting out of the oil business. This is the bell ringing at the bottom of the market for oil. So there you have it, those two categories of stocks. And in fact, they're just about all I own in the stock market.
Well, the other thing that certainly, there were a lot of crypto investors, I'm not sure what to call them, but crypto holders that were at the conference and that we ran into. And, I'm a big fan of crypto for a long time, watched it for a long time, owned it for a long time. And I think that we were hearing a lot of this time is different vibes with regard to cryptos as compared to every other asset class that's ever existed. And I think that, I don't think that I'd like to think that we're not close to a top, or we're not at the top with crypto at this point, even though it was a recent pullback. I don't, my personal opinion is we're not there yet, but we're certainly seem like we're closer to the end than to the beginning at this point, based upon the psychology of the people that we interacted with when we were there. Would you agree with that?
I agree. And the general public is getting involved in crypto now, not just the more sophisticated and wealthier people that we saw at the conference. So I think it's time for caution. And uh, it's interesting that Elon Musk says something, whether it's to buy doggy coin in the past or sell doggy coin more recently. And excuse me for calling it doggy coin, but I think in the future they are going to call it doggy coin as opposed to Dogecoin, because it'll turn out to be a dog. But what do I know about cryptos? Do you have any cryptos that you're particularly favorable towards?
Well, I mean, I like, I definitely own Bitcoin. I own Ethereum Classic. I own with the privacy coins like Monero and Pirate Chain a little bit. I think, but I think that the big thing, like I'm a big believer in them. My worry, and I don't own any Dogecoin, Doggy Coin, whatever. I don't own any of that because it just never made sense to me. Obviously, but a lot of people who have bought it have made a lot of money. I really hope that they sell it and they take the cash and they buy something really useful with that cash, because uh, you don't get that that often in your life. Where it's kind of like some of these people won the lottery essentially by by buying into the meme coin, and I just hope that they don't get totally destroyed on the way out. My worry is the psychology of the people who are in this. A lot of them haven't really invested, don't have much exposure to markets otherwise, and they've done very well with these. And I'm just the blind spots where they can't even imagine that the market would go against them at all. And it's like, were you even here in 2017? I mean, it's like this has happened in crypto markets before, not long ago, where there's a blow off top and then things just collapsed and no one wanted, and they called it crypto winter. Crypto winter, they called it, like that was last year. That was still going on, but people like they just this time is different, and there's exponential curves. We had from a really smart guy about how it was different, and I was like, boy, the idea, it's become ideological for a lot of people, and it is scary. Like you said, someone like Elon could move a market that much just by saying I like it or criticizing it. Not even buying or selling it, just talking about it.
Yeah, and it's not just doggy coin. There were a couple of other ones last week that came out of nowhere and went right to 25 or 35 or whatever $1 billion market caps.
Billion.
I don't even know what these things are supposed to do. I mean, quite frankly.
No, and where's the money coming from? There's so much, and one of the things that came up in one of our dinners was there's just so much wealth, crypto wealth now. That, and people are looking for a home for it. So maybe when these new things come out, these new cryptocurrencies come out, these new tokens, maybe just some of that wealth, because people don't know what else to do with it, ends up just being dumped into these new coins. I'm not really sure what the mechanism is, but there's a lot of captured wealth there at this point, I'm sure.
Well, the worst part of getting involved in a market as a newbie is if you make money on your first few trades and you figure, wow, I've been missing out. This is easy. And at that point, you double your bets and confuse a bull market with a genius. And it's a good way to lose everything, quite frankly, which I think most people are going to do. Famous last words, not, I hope, on my part.
Well, I think that, I mean, this is what's coming. I think is that will be the third one in my life. The first one was a .com one, which, seeing that by as a market participant, I owned stocks then. I was worried about it, and I sold almost everything before New Year's in 2000, and I guess it'd be New Year's. Yeah, it'd be New Year's in 2000. I sold most of my stocks. I didn't have a lot, but I sold them because I was worried about it. But then I watched for the next 3 months as everything just went up and up and up and up, and I felt like an idiot that I sold out the market. I felt so stupid because the market continued to climb, and then in March it sort of collapsed again. But I did get back in a little bit, somewhat, because I felt so stupid that I was missing out on all these huge gains that were coming at the end of the bull market. And then we had the financial crisis, and then, which again, I made another series of mistakes, essentially trying to prepare for that. Leveraged to gold futures. And I'm gonna be okay in the whole thing, but I realize how dumb I am every time I see one of these really big down cycles that occur, and realize it's not me being the genius that makes good trades. And everyone who has not, if you haven't been through a bear market of some kind, you just got to recognize that there's just got to be careful. I think you just got to be aware that there are, like, everything's going up. Everything has been going up since the financial crisis. You really couldn't lose buying almost anything, any asset since then. So
Yeah, listen, I love good times, even if they're artificial good times like we have now. I much prefer artificial good times to very real bad times. But there's one thing we haven't discussed, which of course was kind of the centerpiece of this conference, and that is you've got to hedge your bets politically, and that's something the average American is not doing. Uh, I've said before that I think we're going into something resembling the American version of the Chinese Great Cultural Revolution of the 60s and the early 70s. And it was absolutely horrific. It was terrible on a scale of the Russian Revolution or the French Revolution before it. And the same psychological types that dominated those three previous revolutions, they are now in command in Washington, D.C., and of many major corporations and all the universities and all of media. So I think it's becoming very dangerous to be of conservative or libertarian or classical liberal views in the years to come, especially when things get bad and the average chimpanzee is hooting and panting for a leader to save him and kiss things and make it better. People that say things like we're saying it'll be dangerous. So I think you got to diversify internationally if you're in a position to do so.
right,
and if you're not, get in a position. And if you can't, well, move as far out in the country as you reasonably can.
yeah, and I mean, but there are programs there. It's not that difficult to get residency. For instance, in Mexico, if you have any kind of, I mean, you don't have to have a ton of assets, but from what I understand, that's relatively easy. There probably are lots of options for people who aren't necessarily wealthy if you're willing to be creative and and look into it. But yeah, I agree. It does feel like it's going to get and I this year trying to get my head around what's happening. I read a couple of books trying to get a better understanding of what happened during the Cultural Revolution, and because it's hard to find a lot of great information about that. I don't think a lot of Americans really understand how that happened. That was really done, unlike in Russia and the Soviet Union, where it was being led by the state. A lot of the Cultural Revolution part was being led by the people against each other. Where it's just neighbors, students, murdering and beating their teachers. I mean, not to say we don't have some teachers here who, might deserve to be beaten by their students, but still, like it came, the Mao's Red Guard, that's what they called themselves. And then, but they were it was just gang warfare, really, is what was really happening. The state kind of stepped aside and all occurred. Or at least this is my reading and understanding of it.
Yeah, that's exactly the way I see it. And of course, as we were mentioning over the weekend, I mean, H.L. Mencken, who was one of the most outspoken and eloquent defenders of liberty principles during both World War I and World War II, and during both of those wars, he basically had to dummy up at the risk of being hung by the hooting and panting chimpanzees.
Exactly. Yeah, I think people are gonna have to make choices, including us, at some point. Like, why? Because the of doing these videos it changes constantly. I think I know people really appreciate it. It can be enjoyable for us to do it, but cost benefit can change over time.
Yeah, well, I'm moving in that direction. I mean, right now I'm speaking to you from Charlottesville, Virginia, and in the weeks to come, I'll be on the Virginia shore because I've sold the ranch in Aspen because the ducks are quacking, of course, and replaced it with a much bigger and better house, and everything's more desirable for 25% of what the ranch was worth because it was Aspen. But another comment that, kind of reiterating what we said over the last few days in Mexico, it's that worst comes to worst here in the US, I can just act like Harrison Ford in Mosquito Coast, where he got so fed up, he just left the dishes in the sink, left the doors unlocked, and headed south. So that's always an alternative.
Well, and of course, you will be spent. You always spend most of your time down south anyway, in Uruguay or in Argentina. So that's always part of the plan anyway. On an annual basis, you would rotate between the U.S. and there.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, I don't know what's going to happen in Uruguay or Argentina. Everything can change radically with the next election in any of these Latin countries, absolutely any of them. But on the bright side, Uruguay, for a lot of reasons, is more stable and moves much more slowly than any other place in Latin America, with the possible exception of Costa Rica, I think. But anyway, we'll see what happens.
Well,
I mean,
let's talk about masks a little bit, because I just think that there's one. I'll talk about in the context of what we experienced when we were in Mexico, because Mexico is known. It's been, certainly it's a freer place than the U.S. is in many ways, but there was this weird mask thing going on, at least where we were. And let's talk about that a little bit. Also, the sudden changes here in the U.S. with relation to mask usage. So, we want to share the experience in Mexico?
yeah, it was very funny. It was actually laughably funny. Whenever we'd enter the restaurant, the hostess, I mean, obviously she wanted to keep her job, so she would have done anything management told them to do. And the management was Hyatt, so of course they were corporate robots on a higher level. But whenever we entered the restaurant, uh, they would say, please put a mask on. And I'd say, I don't have a mask. They hand me a mask.
With
And
tweezers, with tweezers, there's tweezers to give you your mask too, because they don't want to.
yes, of course. And, I'd make a joke like, well, I can see my table over there. It's about 30 feet away. Do you think if I hold my breath while I go through the danger zone, um, I can avoid the deadly plague and won't have to wear my mask? They said, no, please put your mask on. So I put it on for 2 seconds and then take it off and walk to the table. It's such a stupid charade. I mean, these masks, I think, are actively dangerous to your health. I mean, they accumulate germs, they limit the oxygen supply that goes to your lungs. You're inhaling particles of lint and cotton that come from them. They make you feel stupid. I mean, I don't see any advantages to masks at all, except they're kind of like a facial armband.
Well, yes, and this is very confusing now. We'll talk about that U.S. part in a second, but I don't think that those. It wasn't just. I stayed mostly at the restaurants at the hotel you were staying in. It's important to note though that these were all open air, so it's
All open air, right?
so there's
Exactly.
literally no difference between the restaurant area and the other parts of the lobby area. They were all open air with great views of the ocean. It was like, so yeah, waiting outside to go into the restaurant was exactly the same as being in the restaurant. There's literally no difference. And I don't think they're used to people pushing back on them, because they didn't know what to say. And when you were saying, well, can I just rush to my table? And I said, well, if it's so dangerous over there, why don't we put the tables back here? Where we still, I mean, like, if it's that dangerous, why are we eating over there? And they were just, they were doing their job.
They were just doing what they were told. That's right, which is the real problem. I mean, the last time I was here in Charlottesville, what was that, 4 or 5 months ago? I was shocked to see. This is University of Virginia country down here. That's what Charlottesville is, University of Virginia, and it was shocking to see college kids bicycling, down, kind of isolated streets wearing their masks while they're bicycling and strolling down the street, wearing their masks where nobody else is around. Not that it would have mattered one way or another. I mean, these people just do what they're told. I mean, it really is cause for a very pessimistic view of the future, that people are just such docile, whipped dogs.
It really does. And it's, what do you think? So onto the U.S. and the mask policy here suddenly changed, where it was for months. Even if you've been vaccinated, it doesn't mean it's the end of masks. That was like the official line. We still need to socially distance. We still need to wear masks, even when you're vaccinated. And a lot of people signed up to be vaccinated under those terms. By the way, your life is going to be exactly the same, but you're going to be part of you're going to take an experimental or an emergency use vaccine, and but you're still going to wear masks. And all of a sudden, I mean, it seems like all of a sudden, with no new information that came out, it just switched. Where now, in fact, if you're vaccinated, you're no masks, and everything can open back up.
I know. It's like that game of Simon Says. That's actually what it's like. And talking about the vaccines, I mean, I don't know. I read all kinds of things from many different sources. And my bottom line from having read a lot of stuff from different sources is we just don't know what the long-term consequences of taking the experimental vaccine are, if there are any long-term consequences, but maybe there are. And there are indications that maybe, for political reasons, the contraindications of taking them are being very much underreported. And we may not know the degree to which those contraindications are underreported for many months in the future, because nobody would want to recognize them, certainly not the government and the CDC and the WHO and all this type of thing. So I'm not going to get a vaccine unless for some reason I just can't avoid it.
Right. Yeah. And I think what I love about this, what I find really amusing, I guess, about this mask change all of a sudden is it's just very discombobulating to people, because, in the U.S. we're so team oriented, like Republican or Democrat, or Bears and versus Packers. It's like we're very like it's one or the other, and we have our allegiance to our side, and if we can't know who's on our team because the jersey they're wearing, then we get very confused. And it feels to me like this sudden switch where, before people could identify the problematic people because they had MAGA hats on, before, and then they because they weren't wearing masks, so like they were clearly identified who they were. And the people who were wearing masks, very carefully, double masking especially, like you knew they were on your
team. That's a sure tip off, right?
Exactly. That among the righteous, they were on your team, and now all of a sudden, it's like I'm trying to think of a good metaphor for it, and this is the best I can come up with. If you're, I'm not really into sports, as I understand it in baseball, the Red Sox and the Yankees have like this crazy rivalry, and it's almost like you're a lifelong Yankee, and all of a sudden you have to wear, in order to show your allegiance, you have to put on a Red Sox jersey. Like you have to not wear a mask to show that you're vaccinated, to show that you're good. Like it's just very confusing, I think, to people, to our basic team spirit, I guess.
You're absolutely correct. Although in my personal case, that example doesn't resonate as much as it might, because I've never been able to get in back of professional sports teams, because especially now, much more than it was in the past even, these guys are like gladiators that you hire them. So whether they work for the Red Sox or the Yankees or God knows who, it's just who's got the bigger wallet that can hire the better gladiator. And why should there be any loyalty to these, artificial teams? I mean, they're even more artificial than countries, for that matter. I mean,
I totally agree, and I'm definitely not into. I don't like sports, but I think that I see people them in a way that it's like it really affects them. Like if
I know. I've seen this at games, and God, if you're rooting for the wrong team and the fans are around you from the other team, I mean, your life is in danger.
Right. Yeah, and if your team loses, that Sunday or whatever for football, you have an awful week. Like you can't, like you're so emotionally invested in it. But I think this seems to me confusion is part of the game. Like if there are, like, the government doesn't mind or maybe likes the idea that the public is confused about stuff, and it just makes them more pliable. When it comes down to it.
Yeah, it does. And if people are mostly concerned about who wins some kids ball game that's being played by grown men, um, it well, it helps the average person to give meaning to his life. Artificial meaning, but it gives meaning to his life. That he's part of something like a winning team of gladiators. It's great.
Exactly. Sports are weird and they have a crazy, outweighed importance in the U.S. That's for sure, and a lot of places around the world, I guess. But anyway, the mask stuff is interesting, and it's amazing. Like all of a sudden, like went to a grocery store yesterday, and some people were still wearing masks, but no one harassed you for not doing it anymore. And so it goes. It's just on a dime. It switches, and it's amazing. And I just wonder, what do you think is next? If like this has been a giant, certainly opportune. If nothing else, leaders have been very opportunistic in, seizing power and confusing the public. Certainly, getting compliance from the public. I wonder what's next. It seems like there must be something that's next because it's been one thing after another.
Yeah, exactly. What's the next mania? What's the next hysteria that the public will be whipped up into? And they've done this many, many times over the centuries and decades in the past, where, like the start of World War I. I mean, everything was gemütlich. The governments declare war, and everybody's anxious to get to the battlefield all of a sudden. So this stuff always happens. So it's pretty dangerous, especially when you're kind of a black sheep as far as with your philosophical ideas. So I don't know. I wish I did. But it could be anything.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know either. I mean, war is an obvious one.
Yeah.
There's the interesting thing that's happening with I hate to even say it, but with aliens, all this reports that are coming out of the Pentagon. It's really weird. All of a sudden,
that would be funny. Who's that fraudulent economist that won I think he won a Nobel Prize. Was it Krugman or somebody like that said, well, maybe the best thing that could happen is that we had an alien invasion. So everybody, do you remember something like that a couple of years ago?
Yeah, it unites everybody. Common cause.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, there's this, passed in the stimulus bill in January was inserted something that said that the Pentagon had to release, I think in June or July of this year, had to release a report about findings about all the, not, I guess there's some still level of classified stuff, but they're supposed to release more or less all the information they have on all the UFO encounters that have occurred over the last several years. And then they've been like leaking them out little by little, always like old ones, grainy footage that's not very good, but it's coming, being confirmed by the Pentagon. And, I don't know, it's weird. It's very, very, very strange. And what a deathful boogeyman to make a problem.
To me, it's further confirmation that my solipsistic view on the nature of reality is probably the correct one.
I think so. Okay, we'll leave it at that for today, but we'll be back tomorrow for more. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.